It's my honor to welcome you to the second in the 2026 Ross Smith Lectureship, the second lecture. My name is Gary Selby, and I am Professor of Ministerial Formation here at Emmanuel Christian Seminary. I want again to honor Calvin and Nancy Ross for their generosity, which makes this vital event possible. We believe that these gatherings are high points in the life of our seminary. There are moments when, as much as possible, we pause from the daily routine of classes and meetings and office hours, we still have a few, and administrative work in order to gather as a community to welcome and learn from renowned scholars whose work has animated our own teaching and scholarship. This is a rare and wonderful tradition, and we're glad you're here. And so I'm delighted to introduce once again our featured lecturer, Dr. Richard Beck. Dr. Beck is a professor in the Department of Psychology at Abilene Christian University and is a senior fellow in the Landon Saunders Center for Joy and Human Flourishing. Isn't that a great title? The Center for Joy and Human Flourishing. He teaches in the Doctor of Ministry programs at Fuller Theological Seminary and at Abilene Christian University. And he's the author of the widely acclaimed book, The Shape of Joy, The Transformative Power of Moving Beyond Yourself. Now, that's all the official bio stuff, but maybe you're also interested in knowing what kind of person this guy is. So I wrote to some of my ACU spies to ask that question, and here are a few of the examples of the many comments I received back. One said, "I am a total admirer. He is one of ACU's rock star faculty, and that's not a hyperbole." Another said he is regularly involved in prison ministry and is dedicated to Faith Fellowship, a Wednesday night ministry of Highland Church that serves lower income families. He's an elder at his congregation. Another, the thing you need to know about Richard is that he doesn't just sit in a room writing or stand on a stage speaking. When someone is needed to drive the handicap van, Richard drives it. When someone is needed to teach a class, he offers. When the prison ministry needs a new worker, he signs up and carries it. When the fellowship hall needs chairs set up, he helps set them up. Another noted his tender heart, how he cried while reading a Lenten meditation in church last week. And then finally, everything he does well, but you probably know that. He is a great presenter, thinker, scholar, writer, teacher. His compassionate character, love of the downcast and the least of these, is not something you see on his CV, but it is considerable. All that to say, he's the real deal. Someone whose scholarship is integrated with his life and his ministry. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Richard Beck.
Wow, that was touching. I can't live up to that. Anyway, so great to be with you. Some of you were with me last night, and if you weren't, then none of this will make sense. I'm sorry about that. No, it'll be good. Let me catch up a little bit. So, joy and human flourishing is what we're talking about. It's coming from the book that was just mentioned. This is a popular book. It's not a scholarly book. It's meant to just be something you can hand to somebody, and it's my take on where I think the whole research tradition of what's called positive psychology, which we're going to talk about this morning, is pointing towards. And that'll kind of come into view in this afternoon's presentation. And so today is going to be a bit of a quarrel with positive psychology to set that up. And if you weren't here last night, I framed this whole conversation by talking about a discussion over coffee I had many years ago with a young student of mine named Brad, who had been disturbed during the season by the writings of what was then called the New Atheists. I mentioned this last night, but if you were not here, the New Atheists were writing in the early 2000s very aggressive books about Christianity. Titles included The God Delusion, The End of Faith, and God is Not Good. And Brad had read some of these books and felt a little disturbed by them. And so we had this long coffee conversation about all the big questions he was asking. And I tried to do the best I could, but at the end of the conversation, I said, "Brad, can I ask you one question?" And he said, "Sure." The question I asked him was, "Do you want to live a beautiful life? And I want to let that question kind of hang over these conversations. I'm going to return to it at the end of today's presentation. What does it mean to try to live a beautiful life? And what does that have to do with the field of positive psychology? So today is about value and virtue, transcending positive psychology. So let's talk a little bit about positive psychology. This is Martin Seligman, very famous in the field of psychology for the man that came up with a behavioral model for depression called learned helplessness. But he pivoted in his research, eventually started focusing on positive things, not just depression, but he wrote a book eventually called Learned Optimism. And those investigations caused him in his presidential address to the American Psychological Association in 1998 to put on the map that psychologists have been focusing on what's called the disease model for our inception, understanding treatment and pathology and symptomatology and diagnosis. And we know a lot about treating morbid psychological conditions, getting people from the low end to kind of back to an equilibrium or some sort of stability. So that's why I guess the negative side of things. But Seligman asked the profession, what if we took all of our empirical scientific skill and focused it on the positive? Taking somebody whose life is just, maybe not clinically diseased or depressed or anything, but just a normal life. What do we know about optimal well-being? Now, this wasn't new to positive psychology. People, the humanistic psychologists like Carl Rogers, Abraham Maslow talked about things like peak experiences or self-actualization. So there's theory out there, but there wasn't a lot of science. Nobody had actually gone out there and really talked to happy people and go like, what's the secret, to joy and happiness and psychological resiliency and meaning in life. So psychologists began to turn their attention in that direction to establish this, to articulate a vision of the good life that is empirically sound, all right? A science of positive psychology. And so that was 1998, and as I mentioned last night, the fruits of this research has slowly made its way out into the broader wellness culture. Most of us know that we should be practicing gratitude. We've heard that we should practice mindfulness, especially when we're feeling anxious or stressed. We'll talk a little bit about this afternoon. We know that awe is a big deal. Awe has a lot of mental health benefits, and so awe is a hot topic right now. And research on humility and how that has mental health benefits. I'll talk a little bit more about that this afternoon. So we've heard some of this research already, but what I want to do is kind of put it under the microscope a little bit. So after psychologists turned toward the good life, they quickly discovered that, the good life has been discussed for thousands of years. And they went back into the ancient virtue traditions all the way back to Plato and Aristotle and discovered this word from the Greek virtue tradition called eudaimonia, which is literally translated a good spirit, but we would often translate it as a good life or, flourishing, eudaimonia. And so psychologists started wondering about what is this eudaimonic well-being? What is the flourishing life or the good life that Aristotle puts out in his book on the ethics? They quickly then bumped into another word, arete, which is translated often virtue. It's more properly translated as excellence. That's where the idea of beauty comes back in here. Arete is more almost an aesthetic judgment that something is well done or excellently done. It is fitting and suited. And the idea here was that arete, excellences, and virtues were arrows that were aimed towards eudaimonic well-being. So if the good life is the target we're aiming for, then the virtues, these excellences would move us and shoot us toward that ultimate target. And so positive psychologists were like, okay, we know a lot about mental disorders and diseases. What about the virtues? What are these character traits that seem to be pointing us toward the good. Seligman and some of his colleagues then quickly published a manual. They called it, where the DSM, are you familiar with the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual? It's kind of the handbook for mental disorders and its classification. They wanted to publish a manual of the sanities. This is what they called it, a manual of the sanities. And so it'd be like the positive DSM, right? And so they began that work, and so they produced the Virtues in Action classification systems. Still to this day, you can go to Seligman's VIA Institute and register, and you can take the classification survey and get your scores on the virtues. This is kind of hard to read, so here's a close-up look at what they produced. So what they did is they went back to all the great virtue traditions, the Greek, the Christian, the Eastern virtue traditions, and based upon their criteria, which you could read about, they identified these 6 as like the virtues that seem to have some sort of cross-cultural consistency. So virtues of wisdom, courage, humanity, justice, temperance, and transcendence. Now, some of you who have expertise in these areas might quibble with some of these choices or ask for a little bit more specificity. I'll have my quarrel here in a minute. Now, underneath them, they identified what they called signature strengths, that the virtues kind of have a normative or a moral texture to them, and so they wanted to come up with a word that didn't have quite so much maybe value or moral, content in them. And so they said underneath these virtues are these strengths, and so when you take the test, what you're going to get is your scores on these signature strengths. And these are the strengths that they felt like would be the undergirding or the scaffolding for this larger virtue. So if you wanted to practice wisdom, you should have curiosity, you should have a love of learning, you should have good judgment and perspective taking, some creativity, courage, right? Being brave. Honest is a practice of courage, being perseverance or grit, zest. And some of these make sense. Some of these you might have questions about. And obviously when they published it, there was like a lot of commentary about these selections and does it make sense? Is it coherent? But for our purposes, I just want to kind of, rather than quibble with the details, but basically just step back and say what happened pretty quickly in psychology, positive psychology, was we believe that virtues were really important and character strengths were really important, and that we should then emphasize these character strengths because these character strengths and these virtues would move us towards a good life, right? Toward eudaimonic well-being. Okay. And what you get when you take the test is like your top 5. Personality test, like here are your top 5 virtues, your top 5 character strengths, which is a part of the question we're going to raise today. Okay, so that's just a snapshot in the role of virtues in positive psychology. What I want to do is ask a couple questions. First of all, is positive psychology, a science of the good, even logically coherent? Is it possible to do a science of the good? So we're going to ask that question. Is a science of eudaimonia contradictory, right? And lastly, is it possible to study the good life empirically after what's called the fact-value split? All right, so this is where I'm afraid that I'm going to take you on a journey and I might lose you. So I will try to go quick, okay? So I just want to prepare everybody. Buckle up a little bit. I want to talk to you a little bit about the fact-value split. Now, for those that know about the fact-value split, you're going to be nodding along and go like, I know exactly where you're going. You are putting your finger on the disease at the heart of our modern world. Like I'm down here at the deep sickness that nobody's aware of because we just this is the air we breathe and the waters we swim in. And if you've never heard the fact-value split, you're about to hear what many cultural commentators believe is deeply broken about the world. okay? And it goes to the project of positive psychology. This is my attempt to explain the fact-value split as simply as I can. Okay, all right. Obviously, before the split of facts and values, they were together. They were married. Okay, they were joined together. And by facts and values, that what we mean is that you could get a normative claim, a judgment about the good, from a descriptive claim. You can look at something and describe it, and by that description, you could even say even that empirical description, even the scientific description, you could draw a judgment by observation if this was good or not. That's important for our conversation. As I tell my students, if you look at somebody living a life, okay, and you observe somebody or you study somebody like empirical psychologists like to do, can we describe those people and then from that description of the way they're living their life, draw a judgment that they're living a good life? If you're handing out gold medals or silver or bronze medals for a life well lived, okay, that's what eudaimonia is. Well done. You know, when I look back at your whole life, that was excellent. Okay, not just morally good, but it was excellent. It was suited and well done. We want to, and all of us kind of want to win that award of some kind at the end of life. That when we, get to our eulogy, people will say things like, "Well done." As we hear in Scripture, well done, good and faithful servant. Excellent, virtuous, good, okay? These descriptive judgments, looking at a life and then drawing a conclusion, well done, good, excellent, used to be connected. Okay, well, how were they connected? They were connected because in the ancient Greek virtue tradition, they were bound together, right? The glue that held the description and the facts, even the science, you could say, with the evaluative piece, even the moral piece, okay, was the idea of a telos, a goal or a purpose, okay? So it's a fancy word, but it just means goal or purpose, right? And it was this telos that kept and the normative judgments together. Now, that's as complicated as this talk gets, okay? So if you want a simple description, understanding what this is, think of a music instrument, okay? If I give you a guitar and I ask you to tell me if it's a good guitar or not, okay? And you observe the guitar and it's all busted up, okay? This, the strings are busted up and the neck is messed up and you can't play music, and I hand it to you and I say, is this a good guitar? You will take a descriptive, factual, empirical look at it, and you will render a judgment. Not good. It's not a good guitar. It's a bad guitar. And the reason why you can do that, the way your description is connected to your judgment of good, is because a guitar has a purpose. It has a telos, which is to play music, okay? And so if you know what something's for, right, if you know its telos, if you know its function, if you know what its purpose is, then you can look at that thing in light of its purpose and make a judgment factually if it's good or bad, if it's excellent at doing what it's supposed to do. Does it make sense? Okay. Well, that's not the world we're living in. Okay? That's not the world we're living in. We live after the fact-value split. So the telos that the ancient Greeks operated on, and also the Christian tradition, was lost. And when that telos was gone, it created the division on the one side between the facts, the objective, the empirical, and the scientific, and on the other side, issues of value, the normative judgments, the true and the beautiful and the good. Okay. They might be like, well, how did we lose the telos? One of it was just the shift in the way we approach science. Aristotelian science was teleological. It was like if you knew what an acorn was for, right? You could predict that the acorn would grow into a tree. So understanding the functions and the purposes and the ends towards which things moved would allow us to make, scientific predictions about what should unfold. Well, as you know, with the rise of the scientific revolution, we rejected teleology, purpose, and instead embraced causality, okay? So that creates this very interesting situation in the modern world where if I ask you how you got here, okay, you will tell me a causal story, right? You got up in the morning, you drove the car, and I'm like, okay, fine, but like, how did you get on the planet? Oh, okay, well, my parents met, reproductive biology, I was born. Well, how'd they get here? How did any of us get here? So we got to go back to the origins of life. And so if you've ever walked through a natural history museum, it tells this long causal story from the Big Bang, right? That's the story. Why are you here? Well, this long chain of dominoes that have fallen and that have brought me to this moment. So we have a good causal story why we all got here, okay? But if I turn you to the future and say, where are you going? What are you aiming for? What is the answer our culture give us currently? Which is, well, we don't really have an answer for that. Like, what is the purpose, goal, or the end of life? Our culture is pretty agnostic about. Now, again, if you're coming from a faith tradition, you have an answer to that, okay? But I'm just talking about a broader culture after the fact value split. I know why I'm here, but I don't really know where I'm going. And so the future becomes a blank, okay? And the trouble with that is, once we don't have that sense of what life is for, if we don't know what your life is for, what's the purpose or the end of a human life, then suddenly now I can't tell you if you're living a good life or not. We have all kinds of different visions of what a good life, right? The excellences are diverse. This person is going toward this end, another person is picking another end. We all have different teleological visions about what we should be up to and what the good is, and thus there's not a real consensus about how to kind of hand out the gold medals of a life well lived, and we live after the fact value split. And so consequently, it seems to be a bit contradictory that positive psychology, to go back to Martin Seligman, said, we're going to create a scientific study of the good life. Now can you see why there might be some debate about whether or not that is contradictory or even possible? Can you empirically study the good when our vision of the good demands a vision of telos, or what life is for? Because positive psychology, being an empirical science, is indifferent toward the good. We're not going to tell a client how to live their life or what's good for them. And so we're going to be pretty agnostic about the goal or the purpose of life, and yet we also want to study at the very same time the good life empirically or factually. But I hope you, as you know, there's no test for the good. There's no empirical, you can't see it in a petri dish, you can't see it in a microscope. And this kind of goes back to what I talked about last night when I was talking about cosmic or existential mattering. There is no empirical test that reveals the cosmic existential mattering. This is something that transcends the empirical sciences. So let me give you some examples. So, okay, that's all very abstract, but let me give you some practical examples of what I'm trying to talk about, where positive psychology, in trying to recover the virtues of the ancient wisdom traditions, and yet without a telos, has run into some problems, okay? Here's one. The number one most used dependent measure in the positive psychology research to assess eudaimonia, or the good life, is Diener's satisfaction with life scale. 5 items, and just ask if you're satisfied with your life. Again, so when psychologists study the good life, what they really mean is, are you satisfied with your life? And that's a bit of a switcheroo. Again, by far, the most common dependent measure in positive psychology has never, ever been good. It's always been satisfied. Do y'all see the difference there between good and satisfied? okay? I don't know, like Elon Musk, we'll take him as an example, okay? Like, he's the richest man in the world. He might be really satisfied with his life. How's things going, Mr. Musk? And he's like killing it, just doing great, highly satisfied, okay? And I'm not trying to troll him, I'm just saying, just pick the richest man in the world and go like, he might be really highly satisfied with his life. Would you set him up, though, as the gold medal winner for the good life? You might, maybe not. Is he, right, if eudaimonia is a goal, and we are aiming our virtues toward that goal, is he the person we're aiming towards? Probably not. We might quibble a little bit with that. And yet, according to positive psychology, he's flourishing because he's happy with his life. And you might think of all sorts of people in your life. You guys ever talk to a narcissist? They're killing it. They're doing great. That's kind of, one of the tragedies of narcissism is that they're really mentally healthy. I mean, they're awesome. They're doing good. Like try to give them negative feedback, just bounces off them. They're like nothing sticks. The toxicity of narcissism isn't really in self-esteem. Obviously, it's the toxicity is interpersonal, right? That's where the price tag shows up. But in their minds, they're doing great. So they would be like in fact, I'm the most awesome person in the world. And if you even ask a narcissist, like, would you like to be the pinnacle of human flourishing, that everybody should be like you, they would agree. People should be like me. So we can obviously see right there, psychology set itself a task that it really can't fulfill. Can't ask about whether or not you're living a good life, because that really just means, are you satisfied with, in your own estimation, are you living a good life? Can you opt out of virtues? Let's go back to this, just going to swing back quickly through here. So again, when we take this test, you get your top 5 virtues. And it's like a personality test. Like so I have my students take it, and we go around the room, you're like, my virtues are kindness, or my virtue is transcendence, or love of learning, or curiosity. And then it's kind of like, this is me, this is my like personality. But the ancient virtue tradition, you can't just like pick up some of the virtues and kind of go, these are the ones that I'm really good at, and then leave the other ones to the side. For example, let's say you're not good at kindness. Let's go back to the narcissist. Can the narcissist say, well, I'm just not good at that. It's not my strength. No, most of us are like, well, even if it's not your strength, even if it's unnatural for you, the virtues, they come together. Not only do they come together, they reinforce each other. Because if you want to have humanity and love, but it lacks bravery or courage, that's going to be a problem for our witness of love. Sometimes love needs a little courage, a little raw bravery to stand up for what we think is right on behalf of other people. Or how about some of us might have a virtue of humor, but our humor is very sarcastic and mean, and it interferes with the virtue of kindness, and so on and so forth, okay? Or even think about like love of learning. Are there some questions, there's a debate in scientific, are there some questions we should just not explore because the consequences, like is curiosity an unmitigated good? And some people might say some questions are not worth, like human cloning. Like, should we pursue that? Or is there a reason for the virtue of humanity, or even just prudence, we shouldn't go down that rabbit hole? Again, the virtues all got to hang together. So part of the problem with positive psychology is they make people, think about their virtues, but they it's like a pick it up and leave it depending on if it suits you or not. And the virtue tradition is like, no, they all go together. These aren't personality traits. And finally, there are dark virtues. Everything that I put up there has a dark shadow side. For example, courage, right? We say, well, courage, that's agreed? Can there be bad examples of courage, though? So, for example, were the Nazi soldiers courageous. Yeah, they were courageous, but we would consider that a dark courage. It was courage put to use for a bad telos, right? The end. So we wouldn't give them a gold medal. We'd say, yeah, I get that you were courageous, but you don't get a gold medal here because the end towards which your courage was pointed was a bad end. And so the virtue becomes dark. How about one of those character strengths up there was social intelligence. And a lot of you interested in pastoral counseling, it's one of the reasons why you're pursuing the career. You have high social IQ. You're good with people. You can read people. You can help people figure out. Right? Is that a good thing? Can it go dark? Yeah, of course it could go dark. People can use their social intelligence for very Machiavellian purposes. They can be manipulative in the way they use that social intelligence. So again, it's a skill, a capacity, but unless you tell me what the telos is or where you're going with it, I would not call it excellent in that regard. I think maybe they're immune to this criticism, like gratitude thing. We all need to practice gratitude. I agree. Can gratitude grow dark? Is there dark gratitude? You're like, really? You're going to ruin gratitude for me today? Just going to ruin everything. Can you have dark gratitude? Jesus said, 2 men went up to the temple to pray. One was a tax collector, and he stood afar off, did not even look up to heaven. But the Pharisee stood before the Lord and said, I thank you, Lord, for not making me like this guy. Dark gratitude, How about love? Yeah, I'm going to go there too. Can love go dark? Yeah. Here's a good example of this. Has anybody been went to a Christian K through 12 school, a Christian high school? Anybody go to a Christian school? Okay. Have you guys ever gone to Milligan, right? Have you gone to like a Christian sporting event against another Christian school? Have you ever been in the stands, And so it's like, my wife is a theater teacher at a Christian school, and my sons played for the Abilene Christian Panthers, and so we were in our blue and our white Abilene Christian Panthers. So always from Fort Worth, it was all better than us, okay? And we hated them with pure hatred, just horrible people, And they hated us. It was mutual. We all hated each other, okay? It was, and it was not good, right? And, it's funny, like Christians, like, why do we fight so much on election day? Like, we can't even go to a football game without losing our marbles, That's low stakes, and we can't, so we struggle with loving our team and our children and our school too much, where we lose track of the humanity of the other people on the other side. Because we know if we go to Fort Worth, what are we going to do? We're going to enroll our kids in Fort Worth Christians. It's just an accident of history that we're on the opposite sides of the sideline. But no, also, right, so can a love of your family become too much? Excessive to where the love of my child playing this football game means I'm hating children on the other side because, they hit my kid or took the ball away from my child. That's a silly example, but, can you love your ethnic group too much? That's a live debate right now. The love of my people. We want to say that's not a bad thing, but can it become excessive? Or the love of one's nation, can that become excessive to where it pits me where I think God isn't actually for another country? He cares about us, I know that, but I don't really know if he cares about China, And so we can kind of see how love can become warped. This is, by the way, what Dante talks about when he talks about in his Divine Comedy, the Purgatorio, and he talks about how, you guys know the Divine Comedy? most of us just know the Inferno, but in the Divine Comedy, you go up it's a 7-story mountain. It's where Thomas Merton got the title of his autobiography. The 7-story is purgation, and each level of purgatory is one of the 7 deadly sins. And so as the saints climb through Mount Purgatory, they burn off, they purge their sins. But the theology of Mount Purgatory for Dante is that all sin is a form of malformed love. At the heart of all sin is love gone awry. And on Mount Purgatory, he says, love goes awry in 3 ways. You can love a bad thing, okay? You can love a wicked thing, and that's obvious. Your love can be lazy. That's the sin of sloth. You can love a good thing lazily, like your health, your spouse, your country. You can not bring enough love to a good thing. And then lastly, you can love a good thing too much, like chocolate. Or these are the examples. So even love, unless we specify its purpose, its goal, even love might become dark in that sense. Okay. So these are some well-known issues in positive psychology. You go take that test, but are we handling the virtues coherently? My concern with the way positive psychology captures the virtues, studies the virtues without a definition of the good, is that the eudaimonic well-being that we think we're pursuing, the good life, ends up becoming the happy life, or the pleasant life, or the satisfied life, and that the pursuit of the good suffers what I'd call hedonic capture. That instead of pursuing the good, we end up pursuing the pleasurable, or what's good for me. And because if you can't specify the good, then you're vulnerable to hedonic capture. And positive psychologists have studied all the various ways hedonic capture is problematic, the pursuit of well-being. So if you take if you read a positive psychology article, they will set this out in front of you, right? There is eudaimonic well-being, flourishing, the good life, and then there is hedonic well-being. And you don't want to go down the hedonic well-being path because of the things I'm going to talk about here. We need to pivot away from the pleasant or the pleasurable life toward the actual good. But in positive psychology, because it's on the wrong side of the fact value split, can't specify what life is for, then the good becomes a cipher for the hedonic or the pleasurable life, as evidenced by measuring the good as life satisfaction. That's hedonic well-being. So what does it mean to suffer hedonic capture? What are the problems with it? So here are just some of the kind of things that positive psychologists have discovered about pursuit of the pleasant or the pleasurable life. One is affective forecasting errors. In my book, I opened my book up with this chapter called the worst graduation speech. I think that's the title of the chapter, The Worst Graduation Speech. And it tells the story of how I was invited to be the commencement speaker at my son's graduation. And it was the worst commencement speech, because I stood in front of those students and I say, graduating class, most commencement speeches, you're dream your dreams, shoot for the stars, you can be anything you want to be, do anything you want to do, the wide open road in front of you, so follow your dreams. And I said, well, if the psychological research is to be believed, don't follow your dreams, because your dreams will make you unhappy, And that was, yeah. You could see a lot of scared parents out there, like, what did he just say? So I said, I'm here to tell you, class of 2019, do not follow your dreams. They'll make you unhappy. And what I was referring to was this research on affective forecasting errors. That by affective, that's just the technical psychological word for emotion, right? And so we make forecasts in life. We're going down the highway of life, and then there's a fork in the road. We can do this, we can do that, right? And I look down this path and I forecast, my joy. And I look down that path and I go, I think that'll make me happy when I look down that path. And if I look down this path, I think I'd be disappointed or sad. So I predict my joy and I go down this path. And psychologists have discovered that people often miswant. They want things, but it's miswanting. The dreams that they pursue or the goals that they're attaining actually do not bring them the happiness that they had once forecasted. They climb the hill of success and they get there and they look around and they go, oh, wow, okay, made a mistake here. And I know it's terrifying. That doesn't help anybody. Some of you guys are like making career choices. I can't show. That's a whole other conversation about the existential terror of choosing a life and fearing. My students have decision paralysis, what to major in and where to move and who to marry. They don't, because they realize it's really high stakes and I can't really make a catastrophic error here. I don't know how to rescue them from that. I'm just here to say that sometimes we're not very good at, and this is short-term and long-term. Even in short-term goals, they don't give us the pleasure that we expect. For example, like on money and hedonic pleasure. So we've often been told that money can't buy happiness. You guys heard that? It can. But you got to spend it wisely. So if I tell my students, like, if I just give you $50, okay, they're going to make an affective forecast. They're going to look down, I can take my $50 and I could do this with it, and that'll make me happy, or I could do this with it. And they often, research shows people often make the wrong choice with the $50. What should you do with $50 if you're a student? Now, some of you, eat. Okay, all right, okay, I get it. Like, really low on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, like, I need to eat today. Okay, I get it. So let's say you've met your basic needs, and you're now going to use it for joy, okay? Not survival, gas, eating, That's what their answers are. I'm going to go buy some food. So if you're going to spend it on your joy, most people buy something. They're like, they have the Amazon shopping cart already full, and they'll buy something with it. And that's a miswanting. What should you do with your $50? Positive Psych says you should take somebody to lunch. You'll have more of a hedonic glow, and it'll be more long-lasting if you take a friend to lunch, or you take them to a movie. So, like, I got $50, let's go to a movie, and we can get popcorn too, and get candy and have So when money is directed toward experiences with people, it does. Correct, but that's not often what we do. We end up consuming with it and make bad affective forecasts with our money. The hedonic treadmill, even if you get satisfaction or pleasure, what happens is you quickly habituate to it. You get used to it. And so consequently, we keep chasing pleasure, but we keep returning back to our kind of what's called our emotional set point. And so it's fleeting and it's not long lasting. And so we run, chasing pleasure, chasing satisfaction, and can't seem to make much progress. So the hedonic treadmill. Narcissistic drift. If you just keep choosing what's going to make you happy, that pursuit of what makes me happy suffers from narcissistic drift, and therefore the calculus of your life becomes very self-absorbed and self-interested. Moral blindness. If we all pursue the good life, the satisfying life, the pleasurable life, a lot of us are not aware or blind to how the choices that we're making to make myself happy have ethical or moral consequences on the larger world. And so if everybody just pursues their best life, we're unaware of the ancillary damage that is happening around us supporting the pleasurable life. And thus, it's hard for a lot of us, a culture addicted to hedonic well-being like Americans are, that when, if we want to make moral progress on a variety of things, we might have to like change the calculus of the metrics, and what's best for me, what's optimal for you might need to be rethought. So we can talk a lot about that too. Another problem with hedonic well-being when you're just pursuing the pleasant life is it thins you out existentially, and you don't have you don't have the resources for facing suffering. When I ask my students to think about virtues that they wish they would have exemplified in their life, I was surprised by this. But two of the ones that came up were loyalty, and I was like, loyalty? Why is loyalty like the virtue you want? And they were like, because kind of what we were talking about last night, nobody's loyal anymore. And so they're suffering from friendships or romantic partners that don't keep their promises. And they just kind of want to be a person that sticks, with friends and romantic partners. But the other one that shocked me was they said wisdom. They wanted to be wise. And here's my point. Wisdom is often the product of suffering. And in a culture that is addicted toward hedonic well-being and kind of an absolute avoidance of pain or any kind of suffering, we're not going to acquire capacities for like wisdom because we are trying to run away from that pain. There's a quote from Carl Rogers that I think about a lot, and Carl Rogers says, not Carl Rogers, Carl Jung. Carl Jung said this. He said, neurosis is the avoidance of legitimate suffering. Neurosis is the avoidance of legitimate. So rather than going through the pain, we behave in really weirdly neurotic ways to avoid doing the hard thing and going through it directly. So we drink, we avoid, we deny, we blame, anything but to feel pain. And so we're creating a culture where we just don't have any resource for suffering anymore. And because of that, have lost downstream virtues like wisdom. And then lastly, if you pursue hedonic well-being, you're what some people have called the dopamine economy. You guys are aware of the dopamine reward pathways in the brain. So what do I mean by vulnerable to the dopamine economy? Just the way the entire culture around us in the economy kind of caters towards those dopamine reward pathways. You guys have probably seen the documentary, The Social, The Social Network, where they're talking to the people that like made the like button. And they were like, I think I broke the world. Like I made the like button and I broke the world, because the minute they made the like button, that's the dopamine economy. Somebody's showed up on my Instagram, my profile, and they hearted it and they liked it, and I get that reinforcer. And so I start chasing that attention. So social media, think about processed foods, where I walked in. You guys ever walked to a gas station? If you own a gas station, I apologize for what I'm about to say. But I walked to a gas station and I looked around and I'm like, this is America. Like, it's all fats and sugars, right? And then behind, I can get nicotine, and then I can gamble like this. It's a hedonic trap. I just walked in there and I'm like, I need to get out of here quickly. Like that's an example of the dopamine economy, where we're just surrounded by things that entice us online. And think about gambling as we're about to see. Okay, online pornography is another example of that. Okay. Online gambling now, we're going to see the effects of that start playing out here as a whole generation of young men are gambling more. So we're going to start getting data on that pretty soon. Online shopping, I'll confess this about myself. How many of you guys obsessively follow your tracking of the package to your doorstep? Anybody do that? I go like, you're like, oh, like the pack, oh, it's in Dallas. It'll be here tomorrow. Like I'll watch my little package, and again, listen, your hedonic pleasures are different from mine, but I'm mainly waiting for a book, but I'm still, new book came out and I'm following that thing all the way from the distribution center to my front porch. And then I get there in that dopamine economy, So that's what I mean by the vulnerability. For pursuing pleasures and hedonic pleasures, become a bit of a mark for the algorithms and the consumeristic culture. We're like defenseless. This is what I tell my students. I was like, if you don't have a big story, I'm talking mainly undergraduates, but I tell these young people, if you don't have a big enough story for your life, man, you're just a sucker, I mean, like you have nothing compelling. You have no big story. Like they're getting inundated with social media and ads, and they don't have that kind of teleological story that kind of is pointing them towards who they should be, and so they become really kind of stimulus response people, because there's nothing more compelling than the enticement that's like right in front of me. And there's a whole economy out there just like waiting to monetize the lack of the story. I'll talk more about this afternoon. Okay, coming to the end here, right? So I want to pivot to talk about pastoral counseling a little bit. So what I'm arguing for is, do we need to start reinserting a conversation about value itself into mental health contexts? Now, I admit this is very controversial here, because we're trained to be value neutral in at least secular counseling. In pastoral counseling, we can be a little bit more directive about what the good is. And there are things like acceptance and commitment-based therapy that really do want to lead with values. So there is a sense now in the therapeutic communities where we really need to start talking about the true and the beautiful and the good. Otherwise, if we just kind of leave a vacuum there, that our clients, ourselves, will want the good life, but they're gonna, without any sort of discussion about the value or purpose, they're gonna suffer hedonic capture. They're gonna default to, well, this makes me happy, and suffer all the hedonic treadmill and the affective forecasting errors, the vulnerability to the dopamine economy, all those things. So how do you do it? Well, I'm going to talk more about this afternoon. I apologize for that, but I'll talk a little bit more what this looks like this afternoon. But let me give you a peek ahead. To borrow from an essay from C.S. Lewis. So you know who C.S. Lewis is. He has this essay that many people haven't read. Have anybody read C.S. Lewis's little essay, A Meditation in a Tool Shed? Okay, some people have. All right, okay. So most of us are like familiar with like Mere Christianity, Screwtape Letters, Chronicles of Narnia. But this is a delightful little essay. And Lewis describes walking into a tool shed. And he walked into the dark tool shed. He saw a beam of light slicing through the dark tool shed. And so he was looking at the beam of light. And then he said, but then I went and I looked along the beam. He got his eye down where the light was coming from, and he's talked about how he could see along the beam out into the world, the trees and the sun, right? Out there was this bigger world. And he says there's a difference between looking at the beam versus looking along the beam. And what I'm suggesting is that positive psychology, because its commitment to the very beginning here, to an empirical, scientific approach to the good, can only ever look at the beam. Science can only look at the beam. It can study flourishing people, but it can't get inside the things it's talking about. I talked about that last night, right? The cosmic mattering. We can observe that people who are flourishing possess cosmic mattering. But positive psychology can't answer where that mattering comes from. It can't look in a participatory way along the beam. And so let me suggest, when we talk about joy, human flourishing, and transcendence, what I want to suggest this afternoon is that one of the things we need to do in our mental health practices is to begin encouraging people to look along the beam. And the reason I told you that story about Brad, do you want to live a beautiful life, is it was my attempt in that conversation to get him to look along the beam, to look through the lens of beauty at his life and look at it from that vantage point. And I think that is the way we bring value back into therapy. We're not going to insist upon our values, especially in secular context, but we can begin asking questions where people are asked to look at their lives and their flourishing, not just through the lens of what makes me happy, but asking them what is good and is this beautiful, and invite people into that looking along the beam. How to do that can be tricky, and I'll suggest some recommendations about that this afternoon. So hopefully you'll come back and I'll see you. We're at the end of the time. Do we want to do questions and answers again or not?
Yes.
Okay, we do. So anyway, thank you. And so we'll do some Q&A now.